It is a new era. We are live on YouTube for the show. And yeah, we're going to this out. It's a nice little avenue to have, and it's a different element. I've been thinking about doing a video element to the show. I've thought about doing streaming elements to the show, but the timing was funny, and early in the podcast, it was just my wife and I, and we just had to like squeeze these shows in whenever we could. And sometimes that was 1 a.m. on a Friday, sometimes that was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Kind of hard to do a streaming schedule, when that's the case. So, this is an exciting thing for me. A lot has gone into this. You can see the little podcast arm here. I'm trying. The crappy lights in the background. Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully it improves, right? So, I got the first stream guy shit out of the way for the first minute of the stream. Nothing to do with the show, just me being like, "Oh my god, I'm on YouTube." So, we got that out of the way. Now we can talk about the topic of the week, which has to be about only one man. And that man, of course, is Sting. And it's kind of bizarre looking at it now. It's Tuesday. He retired Sunday. It's weird to think that Sting is not going to be part of the professional wrestling business. I mean, he has literally been part of professional wrestling since I want to say like 1986 or something is when he broke in. Uh, and he's been a pivotal part of the business since like 88. So it is definitely a different era. It is very much like when The Undertaker retired, or, Shawn Michaels. It's like, oh, an era is over. And I think that is safe to say now. I mean, there is nobody rather, left from Sting's era really competing anymore. I mean, the closest you got, I guess, would be Jericho, but he broke in 90. Sting was the WCW World Champion. So, uh, unbelievable career. I mean, when you really break it down, really an unparalleled career as well. Not a lot of wrestlers can say they were the franchise player of multiple promotions. And I would argue that obviously he was the franchise guy at WCW. At some point, that was even his fucking gimmick. But also he was really the franchise guy for TNA in the late 2000s, and we will get into it with the notes that I have here, because in me kind of going back and going through Sting's matchography, I guess if you will, I really came to the conclusion that this guy just carried every company he was ever in on his back. I mean, I think AEW, even, you could argue, and many times, Darby and Sting kind of were there in pivotal moments, but definitely WCW and TNA. And I thought that what I would do with this, because I kind of came up with this idea pretty haphazardly, just like everything in my life. Uh, it was probably Friday night, and it might have been when I read the article that Darby wrote, and I forget what fucking website. Sorry, I don't remember, but one of the websites, and it was very well written, and it really kind of got me thinking about how pivotal Sting is to wrestling. And then it sort of became a more meta thing where I started to think about how he really is responsible for my fandom, because the first wrestling match I ever saw that really got me was Sting and Ric Flair tagging against Vader and Rick Rude. Blast from the past right there. 1994. And I was fucking hooked, man. I mean, Sting was the colorful guy. He was athletic as all fucking hell. And just Obviously, also, I will just say as an aside, Vader was a huge, huge, like star for me, I guess is the way to put it. Like I really loved Vader as well. But at first I was terrified of Vader because he was killing my new guy here, Sting. And I'll tell you this. This is how much Sting matters to my fandom. I wrote 12 fucking pages of notes for this podcast. I have never written that much for a podcast ever. And so, what I'm also going to do, and I will drop the link in the description of this when it's all said and done, when I can go find it, is I have a little blog, I guess, from back in the day that I have recently found and gained access uh, back to. And I figured, you know what? The notes are so ridiculous. I feel bad for them just being notes for a podcast. So I'm going to put those up if anyone wants to read it. It's really just drivel, but I figure it might as well put it up. If somebody wants to fucking read it, it's there for you. Check it out. So, yeah, it really is very much a personal thing, and I know that that's kind of the wrestling fan meme thing, right? Like, "It's real to me, damn it." It's not that it's real to me, okay? Don't get it twisted here. I mean, I'm a certain level of pathetic. I'm not, I would say, full-blown pathetic, okay? I do have a wife. I have a life, you know what I mean? But I still love this shit. Hence why this is the 71st episode of this podcast, which is wild to think about. And really, somehow, it has gone on longer than 71 weeks, by the way. This podcast, when you really go back on the like Apple library and all that, there's years of this, just a very start and stop thing, but we've been consistent and here we are. We're so consistent. We got to the retirement of Sting. That's how long we've been doing this. So yeah, I thought that we would do this in a chronology. Um, so from WCW slash NWA onward. But what I'm going to do at the end of this thing, because I did send a feeler out on Threads, and we are at Troubles Wrestling Pod on Threads, by the way. That's probably our best medium, social media wise, by the way, is Threads. Like it's huge for us. I get more engagement on there than any other thing that we have for the show. And I say we because you never know who I'll fucking drag into this shit. I've had obviously my wife, but my best friend Gabe has been on here, a couple of times, and I'm always trying to shake and move. Okay, I'm trying to make this thing something cool, and I'm committed to doing that. So here we are. We're live right now. Okay, I'm actually legitimately stammering and stuttering live on YouTube finally. So that's kind of cool. But on to the fucking thing here. Okay. You guys are going, I'm here for Sting. I'm not here to hear you talk. I get it. Trust me. So we're going to do it where it all started. Greensboro, North Carolina, 1988. I don't know exactly the date. I'm going to assume probably like April 2nd, 1988, something like that. It's the same day as WrestleMania 4, by the way. And I think a lot of people now need to kind of put into perspective uh, a lot of these things and why Sting really is such a huge part of wrestling. And it's because of this right here. So Clash of the Champions 1 was a direct response to WrestleMania 4. And for those of you that maybe don't know, that was the year that Macho Man won his first ever world championship in the tournament for the world title. So it was a big deal, never had been done yet for a WrestleMania, this whole one night tournament to crown the new world champion. And that was still back when that was very novel. So with NWA, the Crockett's were really at this point they still had some steam. I mean, I think people sort of have rose-colored glasses on that WCW was the first time that WWF ever was challenged, and that just is not true. Jim Crockett Promotions, and it ended up being that he basically bought the whole NWA. They were real competition to Vince early on in his, dynasty building years with Hulk Hogan and all of that. No, this right here is an example as well. They sold out Greensboro for a match that really is crazy to think about because, Ric Flair at the time was on a monster run. I believe he was like 3 years as world champion at this point. Well, no, Dusty won it a little bit in '86. So he's about 2 years then on his run. No big deal. Now, that's why Roman's over is like he's been champion for 400 million years, but it's like that was just being the world champion back then. You got a strong run. And of course, at this point, this probably was like Flair's fifth or sixth world title. So, I mean, he's already a legend, and he comes in against a guy that had been an up and coming guy. Sting had already, had some matches and he tagged with Eddie Gilbert and Rick Steiner and all that stuff. But he really was more of a kind of, again, like an up and comer mid card guy. He looked great and he was over, but nothing like what he would be after this match. And it's really genius to think about from the perspective of the NWA. Let's have Sting go in there against the world champion, and he doesn't have to win. He just has to tie. And this is a great one. And I also wrote my notes right off the bat. I forgot, and this is great. This has got to be some Dusty thinking here. I forgot that this thing's a 45-minute draw. JJ Dillon spends the entire match in a shark cage above the ring. I love shit like that. I love that that Dusty went, we're going to do this long match. I'm not doing a Dusty. We're doing this long match. And JJ, for the angle, you're going to be in this shark cage for 45 minutes in the lights in Greensboro. I cannot imagine how terrifying that was. And when they zoomed in on it at one point, it's literally held up by like some fucking like moving straps. I mean, in hindsight, not very secure at all. It's really a wonder that that thing didn't crash into the floor. But this is a great match. I would say even if you're a newer fan, check this one out. This one is one of the very best ever. Uh, it really makes you appreciate wrestling as an art when you go back and watch some of this shit because God, Flair's just so smooth back then, and it's clear in some moments for sure that he's carrying Sting. Here's Sting. He's not been in the business very long at this point at all, and he really had just kind of been positioned as like the power guy in a lot of these instances with his tag teams and things like that. So to see him show his athleticism and Flair be like, no, I'm going to push you 45 minutes. This is no joke. And, this is back, excuse me, back when, that was part of being a top guy. You had to really put the work in and the, get the respect of the fans, but also the wrestlers in the back. So definitely happens here. Sting beats the ever loving hell out of Flair in this whole thing. And the other thing that I love though is Sting is busted open in the chest early in this one from chops. And I mean, that's pretty hardcore. Like that would not feel good. And Flair just, man, he really is the king of the chop. Like that's the other one that I got from this is like, whew, holy shit. But it is. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I was going to do like a top five, right? And I decided to do it differently because there's so many eras of Sting. So what I'm going to do is I wrote about the things that I thought stood out from his run. Great matches, mainly great matches. I mean, there's going to be a lot of things on here. I'll tell you right now. We'll mention the Starrcade '97 match with Hogan, but it is not like a match that I thoroughly broke down. It just wasn't because for one, it wasn't a great match. It just wasn't. And the finish, as we all know, was really bad. And it's just it is what it is. So this is like more my sentimental stuff, because that's all I can really speak on. But yeah, I mean, this is the match that made Sting. It's funny because I also don't have the match that he won the world title, his first world title on Bash 90, because I think this match is better for one. And two, I'll be honest, I think Flair, as great as he was still a formula guy. And when you see him wrestle, certain wrestlers, you've already seen all of it, and Sting and Flair wrestled so much. It's not that like I blame the guy, I mean, you got to at some point kind of have a formula. I think everyone really does. But Flair's, I think, was maybe a little more egregious and obvious because he didn't really mix it up very much. So I feel like this being the original match and it being the epic 45-minute, it's the best. It's the best one. And I think the most important, even counting the match Sting won the world title in, because that was kind of a foregone conclusion. He had gotten hurt in February of 90, and everyone sort of knew then that, okay, he's the next guy. So when he came back from injury and got to challenge Flair, it's like, okay, well, they've been waiting. Like now we got the deal. So, yeah, unbelievable match. If you haven't watched it, go do it and sit through the fucking headlock, sit downs and shit. Yes, there's a lot of low points for fans today, but when you look at it and realize, hey, they're building that crowd. You got to go up and down and up and down, and sometimes today in wrestling, it's just go up and stay up, and that's very hard to do. So, but to that point, we do get into, I think, the original go spot fest match, in my opinion, which was Sting versus the Great Muta for the NWA World Television Championship, Great American Bash 1989. And I gotta give props to my buddy PJ, because I really kind of had a blinder on this match. I had this thing written up. I was close to done with this thing. And he said, and I brought up, like, yeah, I'm doing this thing about Sting for the podcast. And he was like, oh, well, you got Sting Great Muta from Bash 89, right? And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I don't know, and he was like, I mean, I don't know. It's one of my favorite matches. And so I was like, I probably need to go back and watch that. So I did. And he was so right. I mean, to exclude this match from a epic, sort of career retrospective of Sting would be a disservice. This was an incredible match. And these guys literally, I mean, it starts off in the perfect spot fashion. Sting cross bodies both sets of ring ropes, because this is a double ring setup. I kind of did a bad job of leading into this. There was a War Games match in this show. This is like peak weirdo, Jim Crockett / WCW. This is like right on the cusp of WCW being a thing. So no one knows what the fuck they're doing, and it's just a clusterfuck. But I will say this card overall is one of the very best cards in the whole decade of the 80s. Great card. And this match does not hurt it, to say the least. These guys fly around like fucking cruiserweights in 96 in this thing. And they are not that small. They're big, jacked up guys at this point. And it's wild to see. And it also makes a lot of sense that Muta has no knees now, or, Sting fucking doesn't get around like he used to. Granted, he's also 64 fucking years old, but either way, this is wonderful. This is a great example of when you got two over young guys, just put them in the ring and let them fucking do their thing. As the kids say now, let them cook. Yeah, let them cook. Fuck. This was incredible. I even like the finish where now I don't know if it would really go, but there's the back body drop, or the back suplex, excuse me, with the bridge from Sting to Muta, and it's the 1, 2, 3, and Muta gets the shoulder up, and that whole thing. So I think it's a masterpiece. I think, it's really, really cool to see Sting in an element where he's athletically matched, so he can do this wild shit that at the time, he's wrestling the veterans. They're not jumping around for this guy. You know what I mean? They're not fucking doing dives to the floor on fucking Muda and landing on their feet. They're not doing that. They can't do that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that, sorry, my wife asking me what I want, um, for dinner, so clutch. There you go. That's what I'm dealing with here, and again, I'm leaving this shit in. Well, it's live, right? We're in the live era. Everything's left in now. So anyway, yes, Sting, Muda, unbelievable. Gotta fucking watch it. The next match, I think, from WCW, and I kind of went back and forth on this because I will say that a lot of people wanted another match that Sting had at a Super Brawl in this spot. For me personally, I put Sting versus Lex Luger for the WCW World Title from Super Brawl 2 on here for two reasons. One, and I did post on Threads this, and I actually got some likes on it, so I'm glad I'm not crazy. Sting and Lex Luger was an intriguing thing in the early 90s. I really feel like that could have been one of the great feuds in wrestling history. I really do. Because they were real life friends and they were both very over and they were very different. And I think this was as good as they ever were against each other because it's Lex Luger as the evil fucking world champion. Harley Race is his manager, and I really liked Lex Luger with Harley Race. I think it really is a shame that he went to WWF in 92 because I think that, or actually right after this match, in fact, that's kind of what the whole reason for this was, I'm sure. Um, I just think he was such a good heel, and he always was a good heel. Anytime Lex Luger was a babyface, I never got it. I was always like, Lex Luger's not a babyface. Fuck Lex Luger. You know, like fuck that guy. I always, and again, I guess that's just me being, biased in my own way, but really, like, fuck that guy. And Sting just was always the guy for WCW. You know what I mean? He just always was the hot babyface. And so this is kind of his redemption, because of the whole Flair going to WWF disaster with the belt. My God, I can't imagine from Sting's perspective of just sitting there having matches when Nikita Koloff for like the US belt going, what? Why am I not the champion? But Luger got the belt. And I don't think it was awful, you know what I mean? He had a whatever run. I mean, God, WCW in '91 was so bad. Jim Herd was so bad. So, uh, I don't think anyone was gonna do anything significant either way, but it's interesting because this is really the not even the zenith, it was the beginning of the Bill Watts WCW, and a lot of people hated it. Those that remember those days probably don't remember it too fondly. But he did bring wrestling back. That was his whole idea was, we're going back to basics. You're not doing shit off the top was the famous thing that he had outlawed and everyone was fucking, mad. But I don't know. I think that he had some positives to it. And one was this, he got Sting that world title. And this match was very good though. Luger always had great matches with Sting because Sting could push him and use his strengths, which was his strength and his look. Things that Luger did looked good, even if they weren't good. And this was fun because it was oddly very athletic, considering Luger's in a match. And again, Sting gets the world title. And I think it was another one of those moments that gets overlooked because people sort of have a blinder to this era because they just sort of think, oh, whatever, early 90s WCW sucked, which is not true. I think it's probably some of the best in-ring wrestling WCW ever had. And that leads us to the next match, which I this was another one. It was like, okay, I gotta have a Sting Vader match. I told you guys earlier that my first match I ever saw in wrestling was the tag with Sting and Flair against Vader and Rick Rude. So Sting and Vader was the big fucking feud at the time, like hands down the biggest. So it's like, okay, well, definitely need a Sting Vader match on this card. And I guess in this moment, I will put one of the recommendations was Vader Sting, the strap match from Super Bowl three. And I think a great, by the way, great suggestion. Um, and that was, by the way, Bobby dot dangerously on threads. So you guys want to give that guy a follow if you're into that strap match. So great match, no doubt about it. But when I really racked my brain on, again, it's about kind of where I'm at, where what's the Sting Vader match I remember most? And it came down to two. It came down to Slamboree 94, Sting Vader for the vacant international title because Rick Rude had just gotten hurt, which ended his career. No one knew that at the time, but that one was very sentimental because that was one of the first VHSs I remember renting on my own after I got into wrestling initially. And it was a great match, but I think the better match, and when I rewatched it, it confirmed my suspicions, is the Sting Vader King of Cable trophy match at Starcade 1992. Another 92, great year for Sting. And we'll get into how 99 was a great year for Sting next. Yeah, I mean, I really love this match. I think when you break it down, this is the quintessential Sting Vader match. And the reason I say that is it worked to every single strength of both men. Vader looked like a fucking monster. He beats up Sting at this point, where I think legitimately he was smacking Sting a little harder than I think Sting even thought could be possible. And the other thing is Sting was the mega athlete here. He was the smaller man. I mean, he's doing front flip fucking capoeira kicks to Vader in 92, dives to the floor. I mean, there's wild shit here. And really, again, another notch on the belt of Sting being one of the most athletic guys in the history of wrestling. I mean, he's doing this stuff. And by the way, he already had a bad knee at this point. He had, 2 years prior to this, tore his fucking knee out, and he's still doing these dives and shit. And so is Vader. Vader's doing shit off the top here. Insane. I think the energy here was as high as it ever was for Sting and Vader because this is really Vader's peak, sadly, in WCW. I don't think he was ever as big as he was in late 92 going into 93. That was really the perfect little moment in time for Vader, and Sting, was right there with him. And I think that it is a shame to think about that. That's a feud that never got enough credit and never got enough, eyes on it. It's weird to think like, man, if that would have been in WWF at the time with that media machine behind those two guys, and that is like the feud that company loves anyway. The smaller baby face and the big evil heel. That's perfect. It is what it is, right? I guess things happen for a reason, but this is a great match and definitely one to go find if you want like peak in-ring quality Sting. I think this is as good as it gets. So another great time in Sting's career was 1999. Uh, for WCW, it was not a great year. That was really sort of the first signal of the end. That was kind of the that was the beginning of the band on the Titanic beginning to play for WCW, but it wasn't loud yet. And when I think back, and that was another fun thing to do here because again, Sting's one of those very rare people that his whole career really encompasses my whole life. I started watching him when I was 5, and he'd been in the business probably about 7, 8 years at that point. So, I really did watch most of his really notable career. And this was a very distinct time that I do remember in his career and just wrestling. 1999 was probably as into pro wrestling as I ever was in my life, because it was the last time in hindsight, of course, at the time, it's like, oh, I got ECW, WCW, and WWF every week. God, being a wrestling fan will always be awesome. Little did I know, within 2 years, WCW and ECW would be gone completely. And that began the dark days until Ring of Honor was something I could actually obtain, and TNA got away from the Jeff Jarrett show, which took a very long time. So, uh, this was one of those times where I loved WCW and really didn't understand that it sucked. Like, I don't know. I don't remember ever watching WCW in '99 and being overly offended by it. I don't ever remember that till like 2000. By 2000, I was like 11. I definitely, I was starting to be less uh got, I guess, by shit. And also the Russo shit just was so much drivel. I mean, to the point that I'm telling you, when I was 11, I couldn't deal with it, couldn't understand it. That says a lot about how great of a legend Vince Russo is to everybody. Maybe you need to assess your fucking brain if you think that guy's any sort of talent. But either way, I digress. This is pre Vince Russo, but somehow very oddly Russo, because that crash TV thing had polluted the fucking wrestling business at this point already. And it's an interesting time. We are in April 26th of 99, and really to set the Jesus, there you go. Can't even remember words. To set the scene, um, April of 99 was kind of the it was the beginning of everyone finally just going, yeah, WWF won this thing. But it still was not that unanimous, because when you break it down, Rock Austin had main evented WrestleMania 15 around this time, and it was huge. It was a huge WrestleMania, one of the biggest, obviously, at that point. You had Mick Foley had his run with the WWF title. He's at his zenith of popularity. You have ECW at probably its zenith of popularity. I mean, Jerry Lynn and RVD is going to happen within this time period. And you had to be around to really understand what that did to the wrestling business. Work rate, at least from the ECW side, became so vital, because ECW in 99 had Just Incredible before he had fallen off at all and really was at his peak. Lance Storm at his absolute peak. Chris Candido. Taz was having the run of his career as world champion. Um, I mean, Shane Douglas was still a serviceable wrestler at this point. The injuries hadn't gotten to him yet. RVD was the hottest act, I think, in all of wrestling at the time. I think that's safe to say. Jerry Lynn had made a name for himself, and Steve Carino had really just become a guy who would end up being on that level. So for WCW, I think it was like, okay, we've got this huge roster, and for whatever reason, this was one of the rare times that they went, let's use it. And the April 26th, 99 Nitro might be the last good to great episode of Nitro. And the reason I say that, and I remember it, I mean, I remembered it before I even went back to watch these matches. It is Fargo, North Dakota, which, man, fucking Fargo got a hell of a show out of nowhere. Fargo, they got at the fucking open of the second hour of Nitro. So not the main event, and we would get into why here in a second. We got DDP, who was the world champion. He had just won the title at Spring Stampede of that year. That was the big Savage was the ref. He hits the elbow on Flair. to get the fucking title off of him. Huge moment for DDP. The wrestling world was losing it. I remember reading the magazines at the time. Everyone's like, "Oh my god, unlikely champion." What a perfect fuck up by WCW though. Here's a guy that was the fucking de facto man, baby face, top guy of WCW in 98, right? The NWO thing got him white hot, even though they beat the shit out of him. He just DDP was over. He was very over, very, very, very cool for that time period. And the 98 DDPs where he had those great matches with Raven and Benoit, and he just had a great year. The match with Goldberg, obviously, that no one saw on pay-per-view because they fucked the pay-per-view up. But he had that big monster run, and they never put the world title on him, you know? And then they turn him heel in early 99, and then they give him the title, but then they still try to do this angle of the underdog champion that's a heel. So great job, WCW. Way to fucking give everyone what they don't want. But either way, he was a great heel, I gotta say. And he defended the world title against Sting one-on-one here, and this was a fucking great match. I watched this last night in preparation of this show, and I really forgot how good this match was. And somebody did bring it up and on threads, and I was like, wow. And I agree. That person said this might be the best match Sting had is in the Crow thing. I agree. I think so. I think so. Just what a performance, and again, got to give credit where credit's due. DDP was on his game here. This was again probably peak DDP. Just a great back and forth. Every move meant something. So many great false finishes. We got, I think, the first instance of Sting doing the slow fall down into the fucking nut headshot spot on DDP here. Just a lot of fun. Sting wins the title in a crazy, just like, whoa, all right. Also, I do want to say that Sting must have two things. Either Sting was a huge Kawada guy and was a big tape trader guy, or just simply he fucks up either a power bomb or a pile driver in this. He fucking drops DDP in like this bizarre gonzo bomb that looked horrifying. I mean, it looked worse than the one that fucking Takeshita just took from fucking Will Ospreay. It was nasty. And I don't know how DDP was like alive after this. And I definitely don't know how he wrestled later in the night. But Sting wins the match. I think like 2 segments later, Kevin Nash comes out and he says, "Whoa, what the fuck? I don't know how Sting got a title match before me anyway. I was scheduled to get my match at the next pay-per-view. So I want a 4-way with Goldberg, DDP, Sting, and me." And Sting comes out, doesn't take long to say, "All right." So we get a 4-way. The main event of Nitro. And as far as I know, the first time ever, at least on Nitro, maybe even in WCW, we had 2 world title matches in one night. Sting, the new champion, who had been champion maybe 2 hours. No, like an hour 45 at this point, comes out and wrestles Kevin Nash, DDP, and Goldberg for the world title here. And this match wasn't as good as the one before. But I wanted to include it because I think this was a fun little gimmick. I'm always into shit like this when you're like, whoa, we're getting another match. That was still a novel thing in 99. That's a thing that people need to really consider. This was the age of wrestling companies really having to reach in and find whatever gimmick, whatever idea they could do to really keep the ratings and keep the eyes of people, because this is, again, this is the zenith of cable television, really before the internet took hold. This was people's form of entertainment, and that was it, so kudos to them. This match was fine. Nash, I think Nash gets a lot of negativity and he brings it on himself. He's a heat seeker. It is what it is. But as a wrestler, I think Nash was much better than people give him credit. He has that that sort of all the three moves of doom thing, like Cornette said back in the day. And I get it. He didn't do the most, but I think for a fucking 7-foot guy, he was very athletic, especially at this time. He wasn't so beat down. And he was over. I mean, that's the other thing. Sometimes being over is enough. And I think that the modern wrestling fan really has to understand that. Sometimes it isn't about the guy you like. Sometimes it's bigger than that. Sometimes it's, hey, this guy draws. Hey, this guy, and believe me, I'm the guy that had to learn this the hard way. I fucking hate guys like fucking CM Punk, and I think Cody Rhodes is very overrated as well. I know, hot take. Some of you people are probably gonna be very upset hearing that, but it is the truth. Okay, I just do. I think some of these people just aren't what everyone thinks they are. But either way. So of course, fuckery comes about here. Macho interferes again here to help DDP. Brass knucks by DDP and a diamond cutter on Nash to regain the title. He lost it and won it back in one night. And I thought it was a fun little thing. And the first match was so good that I thought, why not? Let's add the whole thing. I thought that was fun. The next match, not a great match, okay? But another one where it's like the personal, sorry, I'm fucking with these goddamn headphones, and I'm sure people are like, you idiot, figure it out. I finally did. So Sting and Bret Hart were my two favorite wrestlers by far. Still might be, to be honest. And I never feel like we got that epic match between these guys. We never got a world title match between these guys that were like heavily promoted. We got that complete disaster US championship match at Halloween Havoc 98. Terrible. What a letdown. I remember being so mad about that match, by the way. So mad. And so this was really the only actual match they had. And even in that case, there's a shitty run in and there's fuckery and it's Russo booking. But I had to include Sting and Bret Hart because that was the ultimate match for me as a kid. I thought that was always the coolest shit. And and Bret gets the win here. It's in Toronto. He ends up winning his first and only WCW championship here. So I had to include it. And Sting also is wearing the weirdest gear here. It's like actual leather pants and shit. It's like, wow. So very bizarre. But that leads us into the age after WCW. WCW died because AOL Time Warner didn't give a fuck about it. And to be fair, a lot of other people did not either. And that leads us to TNA. TNA happens. Jeff Jarrett fucking has to have his little jerk off company, and he makes it. And inadvertently, over doings that had nothing to do with him, it gets over. And there's great wrestlers there because they're fucking undersized. And at the time, WWE and the Voldemort, that no one wants to use his name anymore, who ran WWE, didn't care about work rate really. And, this was also like the dark days. This was, after the Eddie Benoit thing where, now there is scrutiny. Now drug tests come back. Now, oh shit, we might actually have to use those workers. But unfortunately for them, Kurt Angle jumped ship and ended up in TNA. And my first great match from Sting and TNA is against Kurt Angle for the TNA World Heavyweight title, Bound for Glory 2007. I think when I go back, this is kind of the beginning of Sting being the franchise guy of TNA. A lot of people are going to bring up his Jeff Jarrett match the year before, Bound for Glory 06, with Kurt Angle as the ref, and that is a memorable moment. I will agree, and that's why I'm mentioning it now. But if you haven't noticed, I really don't think Jeff Jarrett's very great. I also think he really fucking held that company hostage, a lot, and it's just documented, and I think that my memorable moment for Sting and TNA really, or moments rather, begin with this match because I remember watching it live. And while there is, again, Russo's booking here too, unfortunately, there's a stupid fucking run in by Kevin Nash. Uh, it was a great wrestling match. This is peak Kurt Angle. Whatever you want to say about his substance abuse, and it was terrible, and I hate it for the guy. As a wrestler, this was as good as Kurt Angle ever was. I think it's easy to say that in 2007, Kurt Angle was the best wrestler on planet Earth. And Sting was so fucking smooth still. And this was just a moment where both guys still had enough in the tank. With Kurt Angle, he was at his peak. For Sting, he was nearing the end of his. And this was just a magic match. And of course, this is the famous match where Kurt Angle throws a fucking bat shot at Sting, who does not catch the bat and cracks his fucking head and bleeds everywhere. And it isn't maybe 2 minutes later, it goes into the finish. Sting wins his first TNA World Heavyweight Championship. And that was the other thing that I thought was neat about this match, because it would not be his last, because the next match, and this also begins the Sting Bound for Glory gatekeeping gimmick. And again, for some of you Zoomers out there that are going to watch this and maybe don't remember TNA at the time and don't really understand that era, because I have to finally just admit I am an old man. I'm an internet boomer. This was around the time I graduated high school. So I'm fucking old. And I remember all this shit very vividly. And at this time was really the Undertaker WrestleMania streak becomes a very serious thing and something that really becomes a thing that WrestleMania is built around. And of course, TNA, I don't know if it was a bad idea. I liked it. And we're talking about it, wanted to kind of jump on that bandwagon, and they went, well, okay, what's the legendary thing that we can do? And they decided, you know what? Hey, Bound for Glory is basically our WrestleMania event. It was always their biggest event for a very, very long time. uh, let's have Sting be undefeated at Bound for Glory, and let's make that a little thing. And then that became a thing that was talked about. Obviously, started in '06. We're at the second year here. He's 2-0 going into Bound for Glory 2008 against my guy, Samoa Joe, for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. And a bittersweet thing here. I remember watching at the time, I was very upset because I just feel like Joe got a very raw deal with this whole TNA world title run because he was so fucking over in '06 and '07, and they just drug their feet. They never committed to him. He lost to Kurt Angle, I think, like fucking 6 times in a row. I'm not even exaggerating. It was ridiculous, and somehow still remained over because the fans knew. The fans always knew how good Joe was. It's just management dragging their fucking feet and worrying about guys that don't fucking matter. Guys like Matt Morgan that weren't even drawn. You know what I mean? That kind of shit. So then when they finally give him the belt in '08 against Kurt at Lockdown, it was kind of like, okay, he finally won the title and that's great. But it also was like, this should have happened a year ago. And that was the whole problem with his run. He really didn't have that many great moments even. Maybe this is his most notable moment, I think. He had a very lackluster feud with Booker T. He had weird shit with Scott Steiner. It just felt like he was just a placeholder. And I think also it didn't help that in the same time period, CM Punk had won his first fucking world title, and was not being utilized well either. So I think they were like, oh, it's the two like worker guys, with world titles. So we'll just book them the same. Like Joe's not any better than him, which is ridiculous, obviously, in hindsight, because I think Joe's one of the greatest in history. I'm biased, and I will admit that though. This is a great match, though. Sting was there for this. I really respect that he was like, "Hey, man, I know Joe's the killer guy, so I'm gonna have him kill me. He's gonna beat the shit out of me. He's gonna kick me in the fucking head. He's gonna throw me around. He's gonna fucking drop me on my neck." There is an awesome moment here where Sting hits a muscle buster, which I thought was really wild to see. This is a great match. Joe does a fucking diving missile drop kick over like 3 rows into the fucking aisle of the stands. One of the craziest things I've ever seen to this day. And this is, this is a lot of fun. And another one, stupid fucking run in. Okay. Kevin Nash. I know I just put over Kevin Nash, but my God, I forgot how much they shoehorned him into TNA shit at this time. He fucking has to come out. He hits fucking Joe with the bat, and fucking Sting gets another win at Bound for Glory. But great match and definitely worth a watch. Like I said, you might have to ignore the fucking finish. It's kind of bullshit, but it is what it is. It's TNA at the time. And my last TNA match, and there's a lot of great matches. Don't get me wrong. This isn't, only his good stuff. Okay. There's a lot of good ones. I mean, one that comes to mind is Sting versus Abyss in like a weird coffin. It was like Last Rites, but it was a coffin match. I want to say it's like Destination X 2007. That one's great. But when we're talking great matches and great moments, I don't think it gets any bigger than Sting versus AJ Styles, Bound for Glory 2009 for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. And a lot of this is in hindsight, to be fair. I rewatched this twice this weekend. That's how good I thought this match was. And it's cool that we have on film one of the greatest in the 90s against easily maybe the very best of the 2000s in AJ Styles, and they were able to wrestle before Sting couldn't move, before AJ couldn't move either. Not that he can't move now, but you know what I mean. I mean, the guy had a wild style and still does. This was great. This was also kind of the great example of how to do a babyface versus babyface match, but still have intensity. There's definitely that air of we're competing here and I want to fucking beat this guy really bad. And I think it's a great match. There's a cool moment where AJ does like the springboard over Sting and like rolls, and Sting like literally kind of smirks and looks at him and is like, okay, yeah, pretty great. So AJ fucking sells his ass off here. He's like the good version of Shawn Michaels, like oversell craziness. But it wasn't too much. He bounces around like crazy here. What mistakes there are immediately remedied. And I think this is really, honestly, Sting's best match in TNA. And that's counting the Kurt Angle stuff. I think this is his best match. One of AJ's best matches in TNA as well, which means one of his best matches he ever had. And I really like that they kind of went away from the Sting Taker thing. I think they realized that we're never going to get to that level with it. So why do it? And especially when we really are going with AJ as our guy, and AJ wins this match. And it really is one of those true, like out of nowhere finishes. And I think it works very well. So another one, go find that. It is free on YouTube, by the way. Full disclosure, on TNA's actual YouTube as of now. Hopefully that will remain uh, at the end of this stream. But yeah, so great match. And that leads us into WWE and the true disappointment in Sting's career. Really the only disappointment in Sting's career in terms of a full run. Never really did anything. We all know the Sting Triple H WrestleMania 31 match. That was a farce and a complete just burial of WCW. Many people consider it the final nail in the coffin. I think that's probably accurate. You bring Sting out of fucking semi-retirement and you literally just beat him like a drum at WrestleMania. Not good. So after that, somehow Sting gets momentum again. And he finds himself in a world championship match against Seth Rollins at Night of Champions 2015. And I remember the build to this and I really loved it. I remember the whole like statue thing. We're revealing a statue of you, Rollins, the US and world champion at the same time. And it's Sting and he beats his ass and it's great. So I was thrilled for this match, and another sentimental thing is this was really near the beginning of my wife and I's relationship, and we had just recently moved in together. So we watched this match live, and my wife is a huge. I mean, you know, she said it. You can go back on the show in time, a huge Seth Rollins fan, like huge to this day. I mean, she's definitely into Seth Rollins, and he's a great wrestler, so I get it. And obviously, I love Sting, so this was a really fun kind of back and forth. And it's sad because the end of the match, you know, obviously happens because of Sting's neck injury, but what a really good match before that. This was a very good match. Solid. Sting takes a wild bump through the announce table. This had it all. It really is a shame that Sting got injured. And an interesting part of this that I forgot somehow was Rollins actually wrestled 2 matches in a row. Before this, he had a whole other match with Cena where he lost the US title back to him because, you know, why not? Um, so it's an interesting little wrinkle in the story, right? Like Sting gets hurt. Obviously, Sting has argued forever that it was not Seth Rollins' fault. And I agree. I don't think it is his fault, but I do wonder if maybe that extra fatigue did not sort of factor into what happened. I don't know. And to be fair, the bump that hurt Sting, one of those things that when you watch it, it does not look that bad. You can tell though that Sting's fucked up right away. He's never the same in the match since. He's very groggy. At one point, he literally just collapses. So it's a hard watch, but I think it's a watch that you should do because it shows that Sting still had something in the tank. If it ever is the narrative from WWE that he didn't have it at this time, that's bullshit. He had it. You know, he was a really solid performer still in 2015. And it's just a shame, you know, that was one of the big final things WWE had left that they could do and really capitalize on. And they didn't do it, you know, and it's a shame. So um yeah, I had to include it because it was the really the peak and the end of the run of Sting in WWE. But we obviously had his retirement after that, and it felt like Sting's career was over, and it was a bummer end, right? And there was all those years where he was just kind of a spokesman and would do these cons and paint and stuff, and to be honest, it just felt pathetic, and not from him. Because I'm smart enough, I always knew that WWE's wheeling him out to these things. You know, he's not necessarily wanting to do this. Clearly, he wanted to still compete because it ends up that in 20, I think it was 2020, you know, in the midst of all of this, maybe it was 2019, but I do remember when the news hit that he had not re-signed with WWE with his Legends thing, and he was a full free agent. And at the time, AEW was very young, so it really didn't feel like a possibility of him going there because it was really more of a youth thing, you know? If you go back in those early AEW shows, that's kind of all they had. I mean, they had Jericho and they had Dustin Rhodes, but other than that, it was young guys kind of in their first sort of thing, at least on TV. And of course, one of those guys was Darby Allin, who really instantly became a huge star for AEW. I mean, I remember it was like the third Dynamite when he worked Jericho for the title. And it's just a classic moment in AEW where he really got over as a killer fucking babyface and a guy that would do anything. So in the midst of all of this, we have the pandemic. And it's like, what the fuck's going to happen with wrestling now? And what happens is WWE and AEW continue to run TVs and everything with no or limited fan uh, involvement because obviously it's a pandemic and all that stuff, testing, all this stuff. I will say until my last breath that pandemic wrestling and specifically AEW pandemic wrestling may be some of the best shit that I've ever seen because as much as it hurt wrestling for there to not be a crowd, what it helped was there was no outside interference on ideas. And you got to see wrestlers and angles really develop organically without the sabotage of a stupid chant or a fucking internet crusade because everyone was online because they were stuck at home, but there was more of a, oh my God, we're so thankful wrestling's a thing. There wasn't so much negativity. Of course, there was still negativity, but it felt like it was a lot more focused in that moment because everyone was just so thankful that they had something to watch every fucking week. Which I wish that wrestling fans would have kept, to be honest, because I think a lot of this criticism has gone way too far. But anyway, in December of 2020, at Winter is Coming in Jacksonville, Florida, shouts out, North Florida, we had the shocking debut of Sting in AEW. And it's one of those memorable moments that I won't ever forget. And the awesome stare down between Sting and Darby and Cody and Arn. Uh, it was great. And we're off to the races. It was Sting and Darby Allin. They went with that as the teaming. I will say it's very odd that we didn't ever get Sting versus Cody Rhodes. It definitely felt like that was an early idea. It definitely did because of the whole thing. They ended up doing a promo where I do remember Sting saying something like, I'm not here for you. And there was definitely seeds planted for something. Obviously, it wasn't but another year and Cody's out of the company. So who knows what was going on in the back at the time. I don't know what the pushback was for that, but it does definitely feel when you go back and watch those old shows that old shows, Jesus, 2020's old now. Or 2021 even there was definitely seeds planted, and they definitely decided to go with Sting and Darby. I think in hindsight, it was a great move. And their first match, Sting's first match in AEW, was the cinematic match Sting and Darby against Brian Cage and Ricky Starks. And I really loved the rewatch on this. At the time, I think I was, again, we're in the midst of the pandemic, and the cinematic match really saved wrestling. People can say what they want, but it really did in this time because it allowed you to do things creatively. And that's another reason why I love pandemic wrestling. It allowed you to do things creatively you can't do with a live crowd. Like, and it didn't really get over, but I do remember when Broken Matt Hardy came in a year before that, and he was doing like the, it looked like he was teleporting in the crowd. I thought that was neat. You know what I mean? I like little things like that. Or like when Jericho's at his Florida home and fucking Vanguard comes up and they're doing the drone shit. Like you can't do that with a live crowd. It doesn't work. This was another example. They do this whole like grungy warehouse setting with an old dirty fucking ring in the middle, and they even bring it up. Like I think JR is the one that's like, even the ring looks beat down and old. And they just beat the fuck out of each other in this warehouse. I really appreciate all the wild bumps. Sting's taking fucking, whatever chair shots, fucking glass. Darby getting fucking thrown into glass, like for real, just crazy shit. Brian Cage throwing everyone around. I will say, man, Brian Cage this made me really sort of go, ooh, maybe it was a miss on Brian Cage. Definitely a miss on Ricky Starks so far, too, but we'll get into that. He's got another one here as well. But this was a great match. You had a nice little cameo from baby face Hook and Hobbs here, which I thought was really neat. And Sting does another wild fucking jump from the top of this warehouse to the fucking like through the middle of it. It was insane on fucking Cage. And at the end, Sting hits that scorpion drop. 1, 2, 3. He gets his first win over Ricky Starks. And this was fun. This was kind of set the tone for how good these Sting and Darby matches were. And it let people know, hey, like Sting's going to have to kind of do this quote unquote garbage wrestling. And I think I'll say this for those of you that are like, oh man, I don't know. You clearly don't remember Terry Funk's ECW run. You don't remember uh Ric Flair's 2006 ECW or WW ECW run. That's a very common thing. And I think it's because these old timers, they're like, I still have enough in the tank, but I don't want to get exposed. So the easiest way to do that is do some fucking, the old plunder, if you will. And maybe the prime example outside of the last match of Sting's career of just peak plunderness was Sting and Darby against Christian Cage and Swerve in the tag coffin match at All In Wembley. It was the perfect storm. It was 4 really solid performers in a match that is unique and something that hasn't been done a lot, especially lately, but even in AEW, I think there's only been like 2 or 3. And like Wembley Stadium for wrestling is just something special. And this thing was all action. I mean, there's fucking wild dives here. Darby's doing shit with his hands tied behind his back. You've got Sting no selling everything. He fucking jumps on Swerve's spine through a table. All this shit. Christian's there getting beat up like a drum because he's losing it that he's in the ring with Sting. This is just good shit. It was brutal wrestling, but done in a safe way. Nick Wayne comes out, gets destroyed by Luchasaurus. It's everything. It's everything you want in what Raven used to call the gaga and bullshit of wrestling. You get run-ins, you get table spots. That's what makes it fun, And the finish is great where Swerve just won't be stuffed in this coffin until he takes a fucking coffin drop, half hanging out of it, and that's it. And I love Seek and Destroy making its debut for Sting in Wembley. It was a great ambiance and one of the very best AEW moments for sure for Sting. That leads us to Sting and Darby's AEW World Tag Title win. That was on February 7th of this year in Phoenix, Arizona against Big Bill and Ricky Starks. And I'm conflicted because I really think Big Bill and Ricky had legs. I really hope that they continue to tag. I don't know. I don't know the situation with Ricky. There's a lot of rumors going around that he may not be around AEW much longer. And I hate to say it, but I don't blame the guy. If that's the case, I think he's been badly misused. I think the guy was as hot as anybody in the company at one point, and they have not ever pulled the trigger on him. I think how you mess up a guy like Ricky Starks blows my mind. And I am apparently in the minority because I'll bring this up from time to time on social media and I get fucking scorched by people that want to tell me that Ricky Starks is whatever. And I'm just like, I don't get it. Like, I feel like what are you missing that I'm not? I don't know. Or what are you missing? What's going on? Who's wrong here? I'm sure it's me. It's gotta be. But either way, I really liked them as the tag champs, Big Bill and Ricky, and they just never got, I think, a proper real push with the belts. It felt like they just were given the belts and clearly just de facto champs to be beaten. And that sucks because both guys worked so hard, especially Big Bill, who, literally came from the depths of addiction to be a success in wrestling. This is the first title he said he had ever won, which is insane. But this match was very good. Sting and Darby. Sting does a fucking balcony dive in this thing. It's been very cool to see Sting really kind of embrace the end of his career and see him be like, I'm gonna do it all here. And they did. They did it all here. Dives, all the while brawling. And at the end of the day, yet again, kind of again, deja vu. We had Ricky Starks doing the job to Sting here this time for the AEW World Tag Belts. Obviously, at the end of the match is the big beat down by the Bucks. And yeah, I mean, it was a means to an end. I wanted to include it. You know, there wasn't a whole lot of Sting AEW matches. You know, when I went back, a lot of kind of squash stuff. I almost added the weird multi-man where it was like them and Shingo, but I felt like, that wasn't much. You know what I mean? That was kind of more about everybody else. And I wanted to have a good, concise list. And that leads us to the very end here. Sting and Darby defending the world tag titles in Sting's final match in Greensboro, North Carolina, Revolution 2024 against the Young Bucks. And I thought this was wonderful. I thought that the Bucks were the perfect opponents. Everybody wanted to be critical when it was announced that this was the match because everybody thought, oh, you know, it should have been this, it should have been that. And at the end of the day, it was Sting's choice. And once that came out, I was cool with whatever. You know, I'm like, all right, well, then that is that. He deserves it, right? He's fucking Sting. He deserves to call his last shot. And I think he did a great job. I also get why people were weird that his sons were part of the match. That's another clear Sting move. And you know what? They were really athletic. Those stinger splashes they did were impressive. So it could have been a lot worse. And I thought that that was neat. But the Bucks were there for this too. They didn't just fucking do the job. They beat the shit out of Sting and Darby. And you know, Darby, of course, the moment of the match, I think, was his insane leap off of a 20-foot ladder to the floor through a pane of glass and a fucking bed of chairs. And the instant bleeding is like the AEW Mick Foley toothless smile to me. I feel like that will be one of those things that fans of the future will always go, dude, were you there when Darby fucking in Sting's last match, Darby fucking killed himself? That is insane. That's one of the craziest things ever. And then, of course, not to be fucking outdone, Sting then takes a fucking glass bump in the ring. At least he had a shirt on, I guess. But my God, the man's 64 doing bumps through glass, bumps through tables. It was fucking mental. And you had it all here. You had Flair and Steamboat on at ringside. They both get the shit beat out of them by the Bucks. That was great. It's always great to see Ric Flair get kicked in the fucking face these days. That's cool. Yeah, it had it all. And a lot of false finishes here with the Bucks. And you know, I really thought, and I think everyone thought that this was going to be a great match and it's going to be a carry job. And then the Bucks are going to win those belts back. And I got to give Tony Khan a ton of credit because I think it was the right move and something unique to see someone retire on their own terms. And, you know, on top, it doesn't really happen in wrestling. This attitude and idea of you got to do the job on the way out, you got to do the right thing is so ingrained in wrestling and even in people that didn't really grow up in wrestling. They get into it and that's like the mind warp thing, right? And I get it because in most instances that is true. You should, you know, you shouldn't be a diva about shit, but you also should do something good and unique. I mean, sometimes the right move is the move that you don't really expect usually, and that was this. Sting gets the win. Matthew Jackson taps out to the Scorpion Deathlock, and the career of careers is over. Sting retires as AEW World Tag Team Champion, and I did want to say this. at the end, and I'll get into a couple of the what I would say the honorable mentions are, and then wrap this thing up. But when I thought about it, I was like, what is really anything comparable to the Sting Darby Allen teaming? And the one thing that kept coming up in my mind, and something that I would recommend any wrestling fan go out and seek, and I'm sure it's all on YouTube anyway. The only thing that really works is the Purple Haze, Mark Lewin, and Kevin Sullivan when they tagged in Florida. Because Mark Lewin was a megastar in the 50s and sort of just like went away over time. And from what I understand, really kind of had all but retired. And Kevin Sullivan, who had been around for a while, but really had sort of toiled in being, that sort of territory guy. He was a babyface for a long time, and he had just recently in the mid 80s made the turn into what we know now as the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan that we know, basically the devil worshiping guy. And I don't know what happened, if it was Dusty. I don't know what the idea was, but somebody had thought, like, hey, let's see if Mark Lewin would be interested in coming down to Florida. I mean, it's fucking Florida, right? So that wasn't a hard sell, I'm sure. Uh, and do an angle. And Mark, I don't know if it was on his own, but attached himself to Kevin Sullivan, and they became a tag team, and they began to run up and down the roads. And anytime you ever hear Kevin Sullivan speak, he will put over Mark Lewin quite a bit because, he really put him over at a time where it was very pivotal. And I think, you look at that Purple Haze thing that he does, and those promos that they did in Florida, he really put Kevin over. Kevin was the lead of that thing. And to think that he was the absolute veteran and had seen everything, and he was like, "Nah, kid, this is your time." And I think that I look at Sting and Darby in that same way. I think that's exactly the genius of it, because Sting is there to be Sting, and he is, but he's really used his last years to showcase Darby. And the more that I watched the AEW matches, it became so obvious. It's like, oh my God, like that's literally what he did. So even I, at one point, went, man, they should have Darby turn on him, and that's the last match. I don't think it would have done any good. I think that the best thing for Darby was to be Sting's tag partner. I think it's going to catapult his career. I think that if everything works out the way that it should, as usual in wrestling, you never know. Uh, he can parlay this into a great next part of his career. So that's Sting's career, and it's wild to see on paper, but it is. And so now I'm going to give you a couple of the threads suggestions for great Stings matches, and I'll just kind of go through that real quick and wrap this thing up. Ryan underscore Mavity gives me Vader versus Vader at Great American Bash 92. Another great one, by the way. Another great one, but for whatever reason, I think that Starrcade match is better from the same year. This one I did struggle with. The War Games match at Wrestle War 92 was Sting's Squadron against the Dangerous Alliance. An incredible match. I absolutely, probably the best War Games of all time. So I definitely recommend that. But when I thought about it, I was like, that's a great match and a great showcase of Sting, but I don't know if that is a Sting match to me. I think sometimes for me, War Games are sort of their own entity. So I didn't put that in my list, but I definitely recommend it. You got to go check that out. And this one was interesting because I get it. It's like why I put the Brett match in. The tag match from Halloween Havoc 95, where it's Sting and Flair against Arn and Pillman, where Flair turns heel. Match was okay, but the angle around it is tremendous. I agree. Great angle. One of the very best angles maybe of Sting's career, because it really sort of like cemented Flair as his ultimate rival of all time. very cool. And the one that I absolutely agree with and had on my own list, the DDP match from April 26th, 99. And I did mention earlier, but I will again, Bobby Dangerously saying Vader Sting strap match at Super Bowl 3. Definitely should check that out because it is brutal. They beat the shit out of each other. And yeah, I mean, anytime Sting and Vader wrestled, it was money. But yeah, that's what I got this week. It was interesting doing the live stream thing, but I think that we're gonna stick with this. I like it. I like the sort of streamlined way that things are, and it'll improve. I won't be as awkward next time. Probably won't be as much dead air, hopefully. So yeah, thank you all for checking it out. And until next time, go watch like WCW in '99 and come back to me and tell me that it wasn't good. Okay. All right.